Blood does not belong on white pavement, and yet there it was, dotting the stone outside Seoul International High School like punctuation at the end of someone's ordinary life. Somewhere behind the glass, a school bell rang, bright, cheerful, obscene. 6 black cars had already stopped breathing at the curb, and 6 men in black suits stood in the noon sun the way tombstones stand in daylight. A boy came over the gate bleeding through his white shirt, and the crowd did what crowds do. They filmed, they froze, they backed away. Only one person moved. A teacher knelt in the blood without asking what it would cost her, pressed her blazer's sleeve to the wound, and placed her body between the boy and the approaching dark. Courage rarely announces itself. Sometimes it simply kneels. Then the 6 men parted without a word, and even the wind seemed to hesitate. The man who walked between them never raised his voice. That was precisely why the street went silent. He did not look at the bleeding boy first. He looked at her hands, at the way she had pressed the wound, as if checking her work. When his men reached for the boy, one raised hand stopped them, and he called for his own doctor instead. The boy gripped the teacher's sleeve and whispered a name that matched no school record, and something ancient moved behind the man's eyes when he heard it. Then he removed his suit jacket, dragon ink catching the sunlight like a confession, and laid it over the shivering boy. Some men wear their sins on their skin, so their hearts have room for something else. She had a blazer sleeve and a teacher's ID. He had an army, and still she did not move. He studied her the way deep water studies the shore, and when he finally spoke, his voice came low, meant for her alone. "Everyone here saw a boy bleeding. You were the only one who saw a boy." For 3 full seconds he held her eyes, not measuring her fear, but measuring its absence. Then, as his men lifted the boy, he turned back one last time and spoke her full name, her first name, the one no soul at that school had ever heard, the one she had carried across an ocean like a secret. She never told him. So how did the most dangerous man in Seoul already know who she was, and why did she feel safer inside his shadow than anywhere in the sunlight? Before we go deeper, drop your city, state, or country in the comments, because this story begins in Seoul, but the secret started in Baltimore. 3 hours before the blood, the morning had been merciful in the way mornings are before they betray you. Journey Whitlock sat alone in her classroom at Seoul International High School, grading essays about heroes in literature, unaware that irony was already circling the building like a patient bird. Steam rose from a chipped Baltimore Orioles mug, the one thing she had carried across an ocean that still knew her real name. Her colleagues were polite the way glass is polite, transparent, and always slightly cold. In her desk drawer lay a photograph turned face down, the way some griefs must be stored if a person intends to keep breathing. She did not look at it that morning. Some doors we keep closed not because we have forgotten what is behind them, but because we remember too well. The quiet transfer student, Kim Jae-hoon on the roster, was the only essay she had saved for last, because his words were always too honest for a teenager. He wrote about disappearing the way sailors write about the sea, with love and with fear and with knowledge no classroom had given him. But when third period came, his seat sat empty, and something in the emptiness felt deliberate. His notebook remained behind, and when it fell open in her hands, the morning stopped being merciful. Inside lay a bus ticket, a fold of cash, and a single page written in 2 different names. One of them was not Kim Jae-hoon. It read Ha Yoon-jeol. Her scar ached the way old wounds do when the weather is about to change. Then, 2 streets from the school, the city cracked open with a sound that scattered birds from the rooftops, and a boy came over the wall, bleeding. What the crowd at the gate had seen from the outside, she had lived from the inside. The heartbeat like a fist against a locked door, the scar on her palm burning, and grief making the choice her mind was too slow to make, not this time. Now the boy was being lifted into a black car by men whose gentleness frightened her more than roughness would have, because gentleness meant ownership. And as they laid him across the seat, Yoon-jeol found her eyes across the chaos and mouthed 2 silent words, "Not them." She stepped forward before wisdom could catch her and demanded to ride with the boy. The suits laughed, a short, dry sound like ice breaking. The man in the black suit did not laugh. He studied her the way he studied threats, long and without blinking, and then he did something his men had never once seen him do for any living soul. He opened the car door himself. Power that has never bowed will sometimes bend, but only for the one person it cannot solve. Inside, the car smelled of leather and quiet money, and the city slid past the tinted glass like a world she was leaving without a passport. She kept pressure on the boy's wound and watched the man in the front seat watch her in the mirror, not with suspicion, but with something older, something that looked almost like memory. Somewhere behind those unreadable eyes, she could not know it yet, a dead face was surfacing, the last person who had ever stood between his family and a bleeding boy. That person had been buried 15 years ago, in a grave he still paid to keep clean. Yoonjeol's breathing thinned, and his hand found her sleeve the way a drowning child finds driftwood. His lips moved close to her ear, spending his last coins of consciousness on 7 words. "He didn't stab me. He found me." Then the locks dropped on every door at once from the outside, and the sound they made was not the sound of safety. She got into the car. You watched her do it, and some part of you whispered *don't, the same part that has watched other people's danger from a safe distance your whole life. So here's a test, not a request. Predict it, right now in the comments before those doors unlock. Is the boy a hostage, a witness, or something no one has guessed yet? Put your theory on the record where everyone can see it, because in about 40 minutes, you'll either be the person who called it or the person who learned something. Subscribe so you're here to find out which one you are. The locks had spoken first, and the mountain answered second. The convoy did not turn toward any hospital. It climbed instead, into the hills above Seoul where the city's noise thins to rumor, until iron gates swung open before them without anyone appearing to command it. A doctor was already waiting on the stone steps, sleeves rolled, a gurney beside him like a sentence already written. Journey understood the arithmetic of that image at once, and it chilled her more than the gates had. This house had received bleeding boys before. The men moved Yoonjeol with a gentleness that frightened her more than roughness would have, because gentleness meant ownership. She followed them inside before anyone thought to stop her, and no one did. Some doors open for us not because we are welcome, but because someone powerful has decided we are interesting. The estate swallowed them in silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of discipline, of men who bowed as Muyol passed and lowered their eyes at her because they did not yet know what she was owed. The hallways were beautiful and wrong, marble, dark wood, art worth more than her year's salary, and not one photograph anywhere. A house with no photographs is not a home, she thought. It is a monument to something someone cannot bear to look at. While the doctor worked, she planted herself between Yoonjeol and the door, arms folded, a schoolteacher barricade against an army. When it was finished, she thanked the old physician in careful, practiced Korean, each syllable imperfect and sincere, and he blinked as if no one in this house had thanked him in years. Her hands stayed steady through all of it, and only later, alone in the corridor, did they begin to shake, and she pressed them flat against the cool wall until they stopped. She did not know that the man from the school gate watched all 3 things from the shadowed end of the hall. The door, the thank you, the trembling she permitted no one to see. The tea arrived with a smile. The man carrying it was heavy-set and silver-haired, wrapped in a charcoal gray suit and a warmth that felt like a fireplace in a house full of ice. He introduced himself as the master's oldest advisor, and his voice had the gentle patience of a grandfather explaining rain to a child. "The boy will be perfectly safe here," Sagang Oseung told her, and as he said it, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a gray cloth. She took the tea and thanked him, and filed the small ritual away without knowing why. Night deepened, and with it came a visitor who did not bow, a lieutenant of the Biko clan, loud in the way small men are loud when they borrow a bigger man's name, demanding the boy be surrendered. From the corridor, Journey watched Muyol receive the intruder with tea poured by his own tattooed hands, unhurried as a man watering a garden, and then dismantle him with 4 quiet sentences she could not hear and did not need to. She watched a man who had entered like a storm leave like an apology, white-faced, bowing at the door he had slammed on his way in, and now she understood the geography of fear in this city, and who stood at its summit. Yet the question circled her like night wind off the hills. Hostage, witness, or something else, because powerful men do not pour tea over boys who mean nothing. When a car was offered to take her home, she refused to leave until Yoonjeol woke, and the room went still, men glancing sideways, waiting for the word that would remove her. It never came. Instead, one lifted finger and a chair was brought for her. Then a second finger and a second chair for himself. the most feared man in 3 districts, sat down on the far side of a sleeping boy's bed, across from a foreign schoolteacher, and kept vigil in silence. 2 strangers guarding one child neither of them was related to, and neither explaining why. Grief recognizes grief the way the sea recognizes rain. Past midnight, the fever climbed, the doctor was gray with exhaustion, and the household staff hovered beyond the door, too frightened of their master's vigil to enter. So Journey did what vigil keepers do. She stopped asking permission. She rose, walked out past armed men who stiffened, and then simply did not know what to do about her, and found the kitchen of a Mafia stronghold the way she would find the supply closet at school. She returned with a basin of cool water and 2 cups of honey citron tea, swapped the compress on the boy's forehead with the practiced economy of someone who had kept this watch before, and pressed the second cup into Muyol's hands without a word. He stared at it, a cup he had not ordered, from hands he did not command, because no one had served him anything unbidden in 15 years. His men, watching from the doorway, saw something they had no vocabulary for, the boss holding tea like a question he could not answer. He drank all of it, and kindness is only a small thing to people who have never gone without it. Near dawn, she asked him the question this entire house had spent years not asking. "What is this boy to you, Muyol?" His given name, Bear, unarmored, spoken plainly to his face by a schoolteacher from Baltimore, and the room stopped breathing. 2 of his men reached reflexively toward their jackets, and he stilled them with 2 raised fingers, never taking his eyes from her. When the answer came, it was a non-answer that told her everything and nothing. He is a debt. Later, walking toward the room prepared for her, she passed a study door left ajar, a thin blade of lamplight across the dark floor, and she should have kept walking. She looked. Inside stood a wall of photographs, Yoonjeol at the school gate, Yoonjeol on buses, Yoonjeol through cafe windows, months of him catalogued like evidence, and in the corner of the newest photograph, caught outside her own classroom and circled twice in red pen, her face. You've now seen 2 things nobody outside that house has ever seen. A boss drink from a cup he didn't order, and a wall of photographs with a teacher's face circled in red. That makes you a witness, and witnesses get asked questions. So answer one, the red circle protection or target. Vote in the comments with 1 word, shield or crosshair. I read them. And subscribe, because witnesses who disappear before the truth comes out have a name in stories like this one, and it isn't a kind one. She was still staring at her own circled face when the light in the corridor changed. He was there. She had not heard him arrive, because men like him did not arrive. They simply became present, the way night becomes present. Journey's spine went rigid, her mind already assembling apologies, defenses, exits. Muyol did none of the things dangerous men do when their secrets are seen. He did not rage. He did not explain. He reached past her and pushed the study door wider, an invitation, not a defense. And that, more than the photographs, more than the guns, more than the locked car doors, was the thing that truly unsettled her. He told it the way men tell things they have never said aloud, facing the wall, not her, his voice level as still water over a drowned village. 15 years ago, his younger brother had bled out on schoolyard pavement in a uniform 2 sizes too big, because the organization's war had reached a place wars must never touch. A stranger had knelt in that blood, a woman with no reason to stay, and held the boy while the light left him, so that he would not cross alone. That woman was Yoonjeol's mother. She had died 2 winters ago, and the boy asleep down the hall was all that remained of a debt no ledger could hold. The photographs were not hunting, he said. They were guarding, months of silent watching from a distance, a shepherd the sheep were never meant to see. And her face had been circled in red the day she became the 2nd person in 15 years to kneel in a bleeding boy's blood without asking what it would cost. Something in his stillness pulled her own dead to the surface, the way deep water pulls at whatever the shore has tried to keep. She heard herself telling him about the photograph she kept face down in a desk drawer 7,000 miles from home. Marcus, her younger brother, taken by a Baltimore street on a night she had been standing close enough to see it and too far to stop it. She had testified, hand on a Bible, voice steady, the whole apparatus of justice arranged around her like scenery, and it had changed nothing at all. So she crossed an ocean carrying the silence, because grief you cannot bury, you can at least relocate. 2 people stood in that study shaped by the same wound, on opposite sides of the law from opposite ends of the earth, having each buried the same brother twice, once in the ground and once in themselves. Then she said the thing that landed in him like a blade, finding the gap in armor. I didn't kneel for that boy because I was brave. I knelt because I couldn't survive not doing it twice. Down the hall, a lamp burned beside a bed where the boy had woken at last, and confession, it seemed, was contagious in this house tonight. Kim Jae-hoon, he told them, was a name invented by frightened men in a hurry. His true name was Ha Yoon-jeol, son of an accountant who had kept the Biko clan's books until the books became worth more than his life. The boy carried his father's ledgers the only place they could not be stolen, memorized, page by page, numbers that could burn two empires down to their foundations. He had run to Seoul to become no one, and for a while, no one is exactly what he had been. But someone had leaked his location, and the leak had not come from the streets, he whispered. It had come from inside a house exactly like this one. In the corridor beyond the door, a heavy-set shadow paused, listened, and removed its glasses, polishing them slowly with a gray cloth. Betrayal never kicks the door down. It stands quietly in the hallway, cleaning its lenses, waiting to be trusted a little longer. Later, the terrace, and the night rain arriving soft as an apology. She found him standing at the stone rail with the city lights drowned and blurring below, and she did not ask why he was there, and he did not ask why she came. His hand moved to his watch, that small ritual she had begun to notice, the turning of the face inward before every decision that would cost someone, and then, for the first time in 15 years, he stopped himself. Some calculations, once made, cannot be unmade, and he found he did not want to solve her. "Journey," he said, not Ms. Whitlock, not teacher, just her name, bare in his voice, and it landed somewhere beneath her ribs like the touch that had not happened yet. He asked about the scar, and she told him the truth. The glass she'd been holding the night Marcus died, how it broke in her grip when the shots came, how she never felt it cut. He listened the way no one had since Baltimore, without flinching, without pity, without once looking away, and then he said, quietly, watching the rain, "You crossed an ocean to stop kneeling in blood. It followed you. Maybe that's not a curse, Journey. Maybe that's an assignment." And the composure she had carried through gunmen and mansions and mafia lords finally cracked, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of being, at last, entirely seen. You felt that fracture. Something in you recognized the specific weight of what just happened on that terrace, because most of us are also carrying a photograph we keep face down. So this checkpoint isn't about the story. It's about you. In the comments, one word for the thing you've been carrying, a name, a year, a city. You don't owe details, only honesty. Thousands of strangers will read it and recognize their own. That's what this story is actually about, being seen, and you just watched what it does to a person. Subscribe if you want to see what it costs her. Because in this genre, being seen is never free. Morning came to the house, the way spring comes to a battlefield, quietly, and without permission. Yoon-jeol was healing, propped against white pillows while Journey taught him Gwendolyn Brooks from memory, Baltimore living in her voice with every line. Muyol had begun lingering in doorways longer than logistics required, and his men pretended not to see it, which is how frightened men show tenderness. Each morning now, honey citron tea arrived at her door, 2 cups worth, always 2, though no one ever came to drink the second. He never mentioned it. She never mentioned it. But the staff noticed everything, because staff always do, and warmth was creeping through that cold house like water finding cracks in stone. But calm, in houses like this one, exists only so the fall can break bones. The betrayal moved the way its author moved, softly, reasonably, wearing gray. Oh Seung engineered a security rotation with a grandfather's patience, opening one blind window in the estate's defenses the way a boatman opens a channel through rocks. Then he built his masterpiece. Transfers routed through her phone, timestamps forged with a craftsman's pride, a trail of silver leading to the only person in the house with a foreign name. The American, the outsider, the easy story, because the easiest lie to sell is the one people are already halfway to believing. They came for her at dusk, and they brought her to the great hall where every man in the house stood assembled like a jury that had already voted. Her phone glowed on the long table, its screen a wound. Transfers in her name, dates, amounts, the arithmetic of treason. Oh-seung stood at Muyol's shoulder, gentle and sorrowful as a priest at a hanging, and removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly with his gray cloth. "I warned you about the American, Muyola," he said, and his voice broke with a grief so well-made it could have fooled God. Journey did not look at the phone or the men or the boatman in gray. She looked at Muyol waiting for the man from the terrace, the man who had spoken her name like a door opening. And the man from the terrace looked at the evidence, then looked at her and said nothing at all. He ordered her removed from the estate in a voice she had never heard him use, the summit voice, the one that ended arguments in 3 districts. 2 men stepped toward her, and she raised one hand, and such was the strangeness of her standing in that house that they stopped. She gathered her coat herself. At the great doors she turned and delivered her exit line without a single tear, which made it worse than screaming. "You told me your brother died because no one stood up. Look around, Muyol." It's still true. At the gate, in the blue dark, she waited 1 heartbeat, 1 for footsteps behind her that never came. The iron closed with a sound like a verdict, and only then did she notice what her hand had carried all this way without her permission. The morning's tea gone cold. Some people break loudly. These 2 broke the way bridges break, in silence at the center, where no one can see. But here is what she could not see, and what only heaven and this story's witnesses were permitted to know. Before he condemned her, before the summit voice, before the order, Muyol had turned his watch face inward. It was a calculation, the coldest of his life. He knew the evidence was staged, because real transfers required a ledger key held by only 3 living men, and a schoolteacher from Baltimore was not among them. He was casting her out to make the true traitor confident, dangling her exile like bait over dark water. But he told her nothing, chose the strategy over her heart, because control was the only love language he had ever been taught, and men repeat their mother tongue even when it costs them everything. That night, the Biko strike came, and his counter-ambush was already waiting in the trees. And in the wreckage of it, the deeper truth surfaced like a drowned thing rising. The rival boss had never been hunting Yoonjeol to kill him. He was the boy's blood uncle, fighting to extract him before Oh-seung could sell the ledgers to the same corrupt prosecutors who had buried the boy's mother. The war between 2 clans had been a misunderstanding, fed for years by one gray-suited boatman ferrying lies between both shores, collecting his toll from each crossing. The trap had worked. The traitor stood exposed in the floodlights with the rain flattening his silver hair, and for once, his glasses stayed in his pocket. But cornered boatmen know one last current. Oh-seung reached slowly for his phone, made 1 call, and held the speaker up into the rain like an offering. His men, he said pleasantly, had visited a small apartment in the school district an hour ago, and it was no longer occupied. Muyol's blood went cold in a way no gun had ever managed, and 15 years of stillness cracked down the middle like river ice in March. The old man smiled his warm, empty smile through the downpour. "You cast her out of your protection yourself, Muyola. I only picked up what you threw away." Don't blame the man in gray. He only did what traitors do. Blame the man who knew she was innocent and let the gates close anyway, or defend him if you can. That's the assignment. Comments, one side only. He had no choice, or he had every choice. No fence sitting. The fence is where the crowd from the school gate lives, and we established in minute 1 what you think of the crowd. Subscribe before the final act, not for me. But because if you leave now, you leave her in that warehouse, and unlike him, you don't even have a strategy. The warehouse sat by the river like a bad tooth in the city's smile, and Muyol's men hid it before the rain had finished falling. Doors came off hinges, floodlights swung, boots thundered across concrete, and then every man of them stopped, because the scene inside was not the one they had rehearsed. Journey Whitlock was not cowering. She stood in the center of that cold vastness facing a boy barely older than her students, his gun trembling in both hands like a bird he could not hold, and she was talking to him, low, steady, in the same voice she had used over Yoonjeol's fever. She had already learned his name. She had already asked about his mother. And as the armed shadows of 2 clans filled the doorway behind her, the boy lowered his weapon to the floor and began, silently, to weep, because the most dangerous thing that had entered that warehouse all night was kindness. Muyol came through his own men like a tide through reeds, and then he too stopped, because she had turned and placed herself between his guns and the weeping boy who had taken her. The thumbnail of her life, inverted. This time the suits hesitated before her asterisk. And there, in front of every man he commanded, the stillness of 15 years cracked open and let one raw thing through, fear, naked and human, the fear of a man who had almost lost the only person he was afraid to be careful with. He did not hide it. He did not care. He crossed the concrete and stood before her, searching her face for damage the way other men search for exits, and she said, evenly, "He's a child, Muyol. Someone sold him a war." Some men conquer territory. The rarest ones surrender it, one heartbeat at a time, to one woman in one look. The reckoning came at dawn in the great hall before the assembled men of 2 clans, and it was colder than any gunfire. Sagang Oseung stood where Journey had stood, and Muyol did not rage at him. Rage would have been a mercy, and mercy had left the building. Instead he recounted, one by one, the lessons the old man had taught him as a boy: how to read a room, how to pour tea for an enemy, how to wait. And after each one, quietly, he named the moment it had become a lie. Grief moved through every word like a slow river under ice. This man had raised him, and that was the unpayable cost of the life they had chosen. He stripped him of his name, his rank, and his territory in 4 sentences, the same number it had taken to break the Biko lieutenant, because symmetry is its own kind of justice. And Oseung, cornered at last in the wreckage of his 30-year envy, gave his final speech about the old ways, then took off his glasses and cleaned them one last time with the gray cloth. They did not need cleaning. They never had. He handed the boatman over alive to the Biko uncle, whose justice was owed first, whose sister's grave had waited 2 winters for an answer. The 2 bosses exchanged a single bow over the wreckage of a war neither of them had started, and somewhere in that bow, an era ended. Then, before both clans, with every witness deliberate, Muyol did the thing men like him do not do. He named the evidence against Journey as staged, named the forger, and then, his voice level, his eyes on her, named his own silence as the greater betrayal, the one no traitor could be blamed for. A mafia boss does not apologize. The entire architecture of his world exists, so he will never have to. He apologized. And the Hall of Hard Men learned, in one held breath, that there was exactly one person on earth their master would kneel for, and she was standing in the doorway with her arms folded, unimpressed by kingdoms. She did not fall into his arms. Life had taught her too well what falling costs. In the quiet room after, across a low table with 2 cups of honey citron tea cooling between them, she told him the whole truth without hurry, that she could not love a man whose protection included lying to her, that she had already survived one man's silence, because her brother's killer had said nothing at the trial either, and she would not build a life inside another one. Trust, she said, is rebuilt in daylight or not at all. He listened the way he had listened on the terrace without flinching, and then gave her the only confession he knew how to make. "I have buried everyone I was careful with. You are the first person I was afraid to be careful with." The silence that followed was long enough to hold both of their dead. Then, slowly, she laid her hand on the table between them, open, scar upward, the oldest wound she owned turned toward the light. And his tattooed hand came down over it, gentle as snowfall on a grave. The first touch of the entire story, 60 minutes earned, and worth every one of them. The rest arrived the way healing arrives, quietly, and in daylight. Yoonjeol, guarded now by 2 clans who had never in their history agreed on anything, would testify. His mother's death would finally be answered in a courtroom instead of an alley. He went back to school under his true name, and on his first day back, he handed his teacher an essay with 1 sentence underlined. "A hero is the person who kneels." And then, weeks later, the mirror. The school gate at noon, black cars at the curb, suits in the sunlight, and not one student running, because Dokgo Muyol, the man whose name means alone, stood outside the gate holding 2 cups of honey citron tea, waiting for the last bell, dangerous to the whole world and careful with her. Her phone buzzed as she reached him, an email from Baltimore, the man who killed Marcus, released, and beneath it, 1 line from an unknown sender. "Tell Dokgo we've been watching him too." He read her face the way he read weather, turned his watch face inward, and said quietly, "Then it's my turn to kneel in someone else's war." Some stories end. The true ones only change oceans. 60 minutes ago, she was a stranger kneeling in blood, and he was a rumor in a black suit. You stayed for all of it, which means this story is partly yours now, and it just handed you its ending to decide. Part 2. Does it cross the ocean to Baltimore, to the war she ran from, or stay in Seoul, where the man who's been watching him is already moving? Comment Baltimore or Seoul. Majority wins. That is not an engagement trick. That is the writer's room, and you're in it. Drop your city underneath your vote. I want to map how far one teacher's courage traveled tonight. Then subscribe, because you already know you're coming back. The only people who leave the gate without a word are the crowd. And we settled who you are in the first 5 minutes.